He is signing that contract as we speak, the richest contract in NBA history, as our Mark Spears reported, up to $304 million over 5 years. And right now,
so by now, we know that Jaylen Brown signed the 5-year, $304 million Supermax contract that had been talked about as a possibility since the second half of the 2022-23 season. That amount is actually more than what many had projected the offer to be, because by making All-NBA, he was eligible for anything from $295 million, and that was the range that many expected his contract to be in. But as we know, he eventually got more than that. But the point of this video is not to go into detail about the amount of money he took home, but rather it is an attempt to debunk a common narrative that was floating around and is still floating around in a way, which is that Jaylen Brown was or is insanely overpaid. This narrative was really rampant when the Boston Celtics got eliminated from the NBA playoffs. We saw fans go at Jaylen Brown because he had a terrible Game 7, shooting 8 for 23 from the field, 1 for 9 from 3 and 8 turnovers, at a time when the team really needed him, especially since Tatum was injured and the season was on the line. And many fans, including people in the media, made it known that they think that Jaylen Brown should not get the Supermax, let alone the richest contract in NBA history, because then he'd be overpaid. And don't get me started with NBA Twitter and all that talk about the left hand. Most people who think this though only hold this sentiment because of the figure amount and not necessarily because of the amount of cap space his salary will use up, which in my opinion is how we should view these things. Some people feel like Brown is not deserving of the richest contract in NBA history because he's not an MVP level all-star. But when we take a look at history, we see that in 2016, Mike Conley signed the richest NBA contract at the time when he signed a 5-year, $153 million contract. That's a huge contract for an average person, but in the NBA today, those are like Jeremy Grant numbers or Fred VanVleet numbers. At the time when Conley signed that, the reaction was actually pretty similar to what we saw with Brown, and it was probably worse since Conley had never even been selected for an All-Star game. The next historic contract that broke Conley's record was Stephen Curry's 2017 5-year, $201 million contract, which was well-deserved since he was coming off of a championship year. But if we're strictly looking at the amount, that's very close to like Darius Garland numbers. And if you look at some of this season's rookie extensions, you will see that guys like Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton signed bigger amounts. But you know what's interesting? Those amounts that Ant, Tyrese, and LaMelo signed are more than what Curry signed for his Supermax deal. But these contracts are not Supermax contracts. These are rookie extensions. Do you know what Steph Curry's rookie extension deal was? 4-year, $44 million, and fun fact, people were actually saying that he was overpaid. So if this difference should tell you something, it's that the NBA has more money to pay to star players than it did in the past. And that's because the NBA salary cap is increasing year after year. When Curry signed his rookie extension, the salary cap in the league was $58 million, and today the salary cap is $136 million. So going back to Jaylen Brown, the reason he was able to sign the richest contract in NBA history at this time is not because the Celtics looked at him and said, "You're the guy we should give all the money to," or because the NBA thought that he was the most valuable player in terms of money. The Supermax only goes to players who have served in the NBA for at least 7 years, and you also need to have made an All-NBA team or won MVP in one of the last 2 seasons before signing your extension. And Jaylen Brown is the only player from his draft class who meets that criteria. So if any other player from his draft class had made All-NBA this past season or won MVP while being eligible for an extension or a new contract, they would technically also be entitled to a very similar amount. An example of this is Pascal Siakam. If Siakam had made an All-NBA team this past season, which he actually came pretty close to, he could have also potentially signed a $300 million deal or something very close to it. And it's actually believed that this is the reason why he hasn't signed an extension, because he still has a year left on his contract. So he's gonna go for it and try to make an All-NBA team again next year. So if you play fantasy basketball, that's probably a guy you should pick up. $300 million is huge, but next offseason, expect to see a number of players signing a similar amount. SGA, for example, is expected to sign something close to $400 million. And Luka Doncic will for sure get that $400 as well. All that to say that if you're judging whether Brown is worth the contract just based off of the amount, then no, he's not overpaid. Now, one perspective that you could take to argue that he's overpaid would be if you argued that he's not worth the contract because Boston essentially offered him 35% of their salary cap for the next 5 years. That means that from a standpoint of cap space value, he's right there with Jokic, Steph Curry, and Giannis, because those guys get paid around the same percentage of the salary cap. If you're viewing it from that angle, I could see how you feel like Brown is overpaid, but I still think that it's not a bad move. If anything, it's a gamble. Brown has like 6 years of conference finals experience, 5 with Tatum, 1 finals appearance, and is proven to be a piece that Boston actually needs to win a championship with this group. Him and Tatum are two of the brightest young stars in the league, and one thing about Jaylen Brown that I actually like is that he has improved every season in his career, both in the numbers and production, as well as his role on the team. This guy used to be a role player back in the day when Kyrie was on the team, so even with the stuff about the left hand, I'm pretty sure that he'll figure it out, because one, his improvement over the years speaks of his work ethic, and two, he's just entering his prime, so I see what Brad Stevens was doing here, and it actually makes sense to me. Jaylen Brown's talent level is not really too far from somebody like SGA, and it was either give him a supermax or let him walk, and given how inconsistent Tatum is, I actually believe that Brown is not that far from Tatum in terms of what he brings to the table. But hey, I guess that's just me. But yeah, thanks for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of content. But until next time, peace.